Okay, decided to start today's video with the playing to get that out of the way so that I can talk about these guitars and I can watch my view counts and watch times go down on the YouTube analytics. Okay, so let's talk Frankenstrat today. So, on today's insouciant episode of Obsessed with Guitars, I'm going to be talking about the evolution of the Frankenstrat, Eddie Van Halen's Frankenstrat obviously, not Neil Diamond's Frankenstrat, I guess. And I'm going to be talking about where it went from 1978 through to 1982, we'll say. I'll cover a little bit of what happened to it afterwards, but for the most part, just basically covering the main years that people care about with Frankie. So we've seen the pictures, 1977, where he's playing his Stratocaster with the bridge pickup removed, and it has the humbucker in it. And we've also seen the what we suppose is Frankie with the no paint yet. But it's the cover of Van Halen 1 where we really get 78 Frankie, black and white Frankie, as we picture it, as we think of the Frankenstrat. And what is that guitar? Well, Eddie went and bought himself an ash body, a factory second from Wayne Charvel. And he was told, oh, this is a factory second, and he didn't know what that meant. And Eddie said, well, does that mean that it's second in line for production? And he had to explain to him, no, actually it just means that there is a flaw on it, and we can't sell it for full price. Eddie bought it for a reduced price. And he bought a neck as well, a 21 fret large head, although it's not a CBS head, it is this. This was actually, and you can see I'm continuing to get rid of the finish from this because I'm going to be oiling it. This was a Squire Telly Deluxe neck, and I reshaped the CBS headstock into what Frankie actually had, which was this kind of in-between regular Strat headstock and CBS headstock, the Lynn Ellsworth shape, and I'll post a link up to where you can see the headstock shapes compared to a CBS headstock shape. So if you order, say, a Warmoth neck or a Musicraft neck, and you don't get a Musicraft Frankie neck, you're going to be getting something that's closer to what Fender had with the CBS neck, CBS headstock shape, which was larger than the Lynn Ellsworth shape. And it's only a difference of like a 1/16 of an inch or something like that. It's very, very, very slight, but it makes a big visual difference when you see it from afar. So he got that neck, and altogether paid like $130 for the neck and the body. And then he went and got the trem out of his '63 Strat, and he got the pickup out of his Gibson ES335, and he mishmashed it all together. He basically wanted to create a Gibson Fender cross-pollination. In fact, on Frankie, on that Lynn Ellsworth neck, it originally had a Gibson logo on the headstock. They put a Gibson logo on. So this is the guitar that he had finished probably post when he recorded Van Halen 1. At least I have seen plenty of arguments as to whether or not Frankie actually made it on Van Halen 1, at least in its black and white form. Perhaps he was playing it in its, and you can see like a picture here of when supposedly this is Frankie and had no finish on it whatsoever. So the specs of Frankie were a hard northern ash body, most likely. I'll link here. There's a guy who's claiming that it was swamp ash because he knew a guy who went and picked up Frankie and said that it felt really light. And I'm not going to get into all that. The general consensus is that it is hard northern ash. And the neck, of course, was maple, a two-piece maple neck with that Lynn Ellsworth large CBS headstock shape. Bird's eye maple. So two-piece in that it's like this one. It doesn't have a skunk stripe on the back. It also had heel truss rod adjust. And it was a 12-inch radius with jumbo fret wire for the time. Probably, I believe it was like a Gibson size jumbo fret wire, and a brass nut, a 1 3/4 inch nut, if I didn't say that. Schaller M6 tuners, and the way he would help keep it in tune is, number one, he would not put the B through the string tree. He would only put the E through the string tree. and he used 3-in-1 oil to. So notice when I play that tune. He would use 3-in-1 oil to lubricate the nut, and I believe as well as the string tree. And he would also, when he wound the strings over the posts, and this is a set of staggered tuners, it helps keep the break angle, but on the low E especially, he would wind it so that the low E would come really high. Like, you know, instead of being wound like most strings where you have the windings above where the string comes off of the tuner, he would wind the lower strings so that it would come over around the top and get as straight of an angle over that nut as is physically possible. As for the trem, now I know that they're using a Clouson brass block, and this is, I'll go over what this is in just a minute. But you know, six screws trem. He had all 6 screws in there. On like the early iteration of Bumblebee, he would remove the middle 4 screws, as a lot of guys would at the time. You can see this also on Randy Rhoads' Concorde, Jackson Concorde, where they only had the outside 2 screws. He cut his own pickguard, just out of a sheet of black pickguard material. Put in a single volume knob. He couldn't figure out how to wire up anything else. We'll get more into that in a minute. And of course the knob says tone on it as well. And he loves to use these eyelet hooks, and he would go back and forth on various different methodologies over the years. He would use a Gibson jack plate over top of a rope. He used those old, you know, weird press-in strap blocks where you would have the insert in the body and then you have a post that would go into it, which are annoying because if you lose that strap or want to use another strap, you're kind of out of luck. But he made a strap that's a lot like this. Now, this does not have the conical studs on it, but you know, this is like little pyramids, but still it gets the illusion across. And he would use chain, and he would use these hooks to hook onto the guitar like that. And that was his preferred method. Went back to that. In fact, you can buy for like $40 a set of eyelet hooks and clasps from Van Halen, or you can go to Home Depot and spend about 10. That's what I prefer to do. Now, another thing he had on here, you can see the serial number on the back of the neck plate there. He kept that neck plate on Frankie basically forever. So I think pretty much the only things that actually survived all the way through every iteration of Frankie were the neck plate with that original serial number, the neck screws, and the body. I can't really think of much else that would have survived. Maybe the jack plate would have survived as well. And so it's a very simple guitar, single pickup guitar, kind of set the template for the Super Strat. And he also, he liked his necks raw or oiled. This guitar has, I put Danish oil on here, which is much more penetrative than tongue oil, which is what Eddie liked to use. Maple likes to warp, so it's best to take care of it and keep it preserved, because if you're going to be out playing a lot, there's a good chance that your maple will warp. It's very hard wood, incredibly stiff wood, but it is subject to temperature change. Of course, you know, over the years, Eddie would go to things like quarter sawn maple with graphite reinforcement rods, and you know, now you can get baked maple, which is very resistive to climate changes, I guess we'll say. And that is the 78 in a nutshell. Now, this one is very close to that, but where this one differs, and I'll talk about this guitar just briefly because again, this is for sale. This is a guitar fetish neck and a guitar fetish body, guitar fetish basswood body, because originally I was going to be going for more of his later tone. When he went to the Ernie Ball Music Man, the PV51 or the PV Wolfgang and the EDH Wolfgang, he went to basswood with a maple top, and I was going to put in like a DiMarzio tone zone or find one of the Ernie Ball DiMarzio pickups and put that in here. But ultimately I just decided, you know what, I really just want to build a Frankie. I just love Frankie. The bridge pickup, I actually love the tone of the Ibanez Destroyer on Van Halen 1 more than the tone of the other guitar he was using, Frankie or whatever. And so I grabbed a low wind PAF kind of pickup here. This is about 8.5K, and I put in an Alnico 8 magnet to replicate the Ibanez Super 70, which is the pickup that is now really expensive to find if you want to buy one. But that was the pickup that Eddie really loved and was in his Ibanez Destroyer. So that's the tone I like. Now, this does have a second pickup underneath of the pick guard. It is a kind of super distortion-y kind of thing, which I put in here because it has a strong ceramic magnet, so it can reach up through that pick guard, reach out to these strings because they are kind of far away from that neck pickup, and it is hard mounted in there, surrounded with foam, so that it won't move or go microphonic. This neck, again, a GFS neck that I have Danish oiled. I had to level and crown the frets because they were terrible. They needed a good fret dressing. Put in a brass nut, and the original nut was very deep in here, so I had to put in a little flame maple spacer, and I had to offset this nut just to make it line up with these not perfectly centered dots, and even so, it's still not quite centered with this dot, although it gets centered as it goes further up the fingerboard, but that's just guitar fetish control. I mean, it's just what it is. You're buying a $40 neck and turning it into a $140 neck through a lot of elbow grease, and it's just how it goes. Also, their paddles, which this was a paddle headstock, are not big enough for the Lynn Ellsworth headstock shape, so I had to go with a standard Strat headstock shape. These tuners are Tone Ninja staggered tuners. They're not locking. Well, they can do locking, and I have a roller string tree to help with tuning stability. 3-in-1 oil, the crap out of it, of course. 2 coats of Danish oil to really protect this neck. A little bit of dirt rubbed on the frets here, on the fretboard here, to give that simulated age, and of course a lot of dents and dings put into the headstock and everything. Although I always leave the back of the neck unscathed because, well, nobody likes to play with feeling a lot of dents behind their thumb. By the way, this basswood body, if you buy from GFS's basic line, gfsguitarfetish.com, if you buy from their basics line, it's not full width. They say it's full thickness, but it's not. I put in a standard Strat trim and immediately had the block sticking out the back. So I went with one of GFS's actually quite excellent Strat bridges with a brass block. Now, the brass block came a little bit on the corroded side, but I was going to relic it anyway, so whatever, actually. All right, actually pre-relic a little bit. Really fantastic trim. I'm quite impressed, and of course I have the bar in the case and a little piece of tape over this to hold the spring in place. And this pick guard, I hand carved these. I made a template for the old Eddie Van Halen black pick guard. It has this straight kind of place here and the chunk out there. So I made a template so I can make these as much as I want. And I regard making pick guards as a punishment. And of course a push-push pot so I can switch between the 2 pickups. And tone knob, of course. And otherwise the eyelet hooks and the output jack, all the rest of the stuff that I've already shown you. Now, one thing that's really important to know about the 78 Frankenstrat, and I made a 78 for somebody who, when I showed him a picture of the progress, he said, "Oh, cool, when are you going to paint the pinstripes?" Well, the thing is, the pinstripes on here are tape. Eddie Van Halen taped them. You can take a look at old pictures of when Eddie was on stage, and you can see places where the pinstripes are broken. In fact, you can see one of the more famous parts is right here. That was originally going across, but in most of the pictures that's broken fairly early on. And you can see when he went to the rosewood fingerboard and the white pickguard that those pinstripes are gone. That's because he only just wrapped it in vinyl tape. What he did. Otherwise, it is Schwinn bicycle paint. Although, if you want to go with replicating Eddie's paint, Duplicolor is what a lot of people really like to go with. I usually grab Krylon, and if I'm doing a job if I'm making a guitar for somebody, I usually use nitro lacquer because you can fix nitro lacquer way easier. Usually using StuMac color tone for the black, and I usually use Krylon for the white because Krylon lacquer is going to be a lot more hardy. It's designed for furniture and those kinds of things, so the color's not going to fade nearly like it will with a vintage style nitro lacquer paint. And then, of course, clear coat the thing as well. But nitro lacquer, because it never really totally solidifies, is a lot easier to fix if there is a scratch or something like that. But otherwise, other than the basswood and the fact that I, like try to go with a Super 70 pickup in here, this is otherwise a clone of how Frankie was in '78. But of course, Eddie could not leave well enough alone because he was a tinkerer. And he loved to change and modify and go through various iterations. Now, I know this doesn't look like an '82 Frankenstrat, but specs-wise, it is. And this is an ash body. It's definitely a lot heavier, but it's not bad. It's not punishing. If you're going to go with heavy northern ash, it's really not that big of a deal, I think. And I'm not the biggest, strongest guy in the world. Eddie was definitely a larger, bigger guy than I am, and he made do with heavier guitars just fine. So, in between 1978 and this, Frankie went through a lot of revisions, and it got a lot of different necks. Let's start with the necks. So, this is not the squared off telly heel neck right here, although I did grab a neck with a paddle headstock and a squared off heel so that I can make a proper Frankie. Although, of course, this is not bird's eye maple like the later Frankie was, nor is it 1 3/4 inch nut. But again, you're trying to go for the appearance, and then you make the thing playable. So this is actually a, just as an aside, real quick on this particular guitar. Let me go over this guitar real quick. Obviously, I went with the Egyptian theme, a lot of pinstriping and different patterns, and of course, it's an actual maze that you can solve, and the neck has its own patterns as well, and the side dots are covered up, but I did go with these stripes to show you where the dots would be. And, there's the Anubis head and Ankh on there. But this is spec-wise, other than the fact that it's a round heel, same as Eddie's '82 Frankie. So this is a maple neck, and this is actually off of a Squire vintage vibe, I want to say. I say that because it's quarter sawn. I have never seen a Squire neck that has quarter sawn maple in it. And why does quarter sawn matter? Why did Eddie start to like that a lot? And why should you care about whether it's quarter sawn or flat sawn? So here's a flat sawn neck, and you can see that the grain goes this way. Well, in quarter sawn necks, the grain is vertical. And this isn't for strength or rigidity as much. It is a little more rigid, but not a whole lot. It's about how it reacts with the environment. When there's humidity, quarter sawn maple will, if you have your guitar like this, quarter sawn maple will expand this way. Flat sawn maple will expand this way. And that is where you get the tuning instability across different climates. If you take your guitar in and out of air conditioning, the flat sawn maple is much more likely to expand and contract in the wrong way for tuning stability, and quarter sawn maple will expand and contract in the right way for tuning stability. So that's why it matters, and that's why I was blown away when I got this neck that was indeed the case. So he still had Schaller M6 tuners on it. These are Tone Ninja Gold Stagger tuners. A G.O.A.T. This is a G.O.A.T. locking nut. Now the '82 Frankie had a bird's eye maple neck with a 1 3/4 inch nut. It was not the Lynn Ellsworth neck. It had the the '82 had that squared telly heel going on, which I'll tell you why in a second. And of course a Floyd Rose nut. Now my understanding is, and why I have a narrower nut on here, is because Eddie had a 1 3/4 inch neck width neck with a 1 11/16 inch nut. Now this is a 1 11/16 inch neck with a 1 5/8 inch nut, trying to maintain that appearance that Eddie had a narrower nut on than he had a neck, which I actually love because it keeps the strings further away from the edge, where I have a tendency to pull them off. George Lynch, I believe, likes having the strings closer to the edge. I hate that. I really don't like that at all. Then, again, Northern Ash body, same body as Frankie has had the entire time. A lot of holes are drilled in it by this point. And of course, by 1982, he also had the final evolution of the Floyd Rose, because it went through a lot of evolutions, where it had no fine tuners on it at all, all the way up through having these fine tuners. You know, here's a Floyd right here, and you can see that it has this nice angle here, which keeps the fine tuners far away. Earlier versions had them set further in, as they were trying to figure out, how can we give you tuning ability after the guitar has been locked up, as well as keeping those tuning screws out and away from your hand so you don't bump into them. And he had, by the end, a big brass block in the back. And of course, I believe it was still a screw-in arm at that point and not a push-in arm. The pickups that he went through on Frankie, oh my gosh. Starting out with supposedly the PAF, he supposedly had Mighty Mite 1400 in it at one point. He went to a white Gibson PAF at one point when he had the pick guard, little small pick guard, covering like this. I actually made, he made it out of a vinyl record, and I actually made one at one point out of a vinyl record because I was trying to make all the different iterations of Eddie's Frankenstrat. He had a white pick guard on it. He had, he put the neck pickup in, as well as he had a telly. I don't have a telly pickup sitting around anywhere I can grab easily, but that's why the route is the way it is. He routed for the angle of the bridge pickup, but then he also routed this big route in here, and that's because he had put a telly pickup in the middle, and you can see that in the 79 with the white pick guard, and you can see it also when he moved to having no pick guard but had the Gibson Les Paul style jack plates holding the volume knob in place, that he actually had a telly pickup stuck in the middle. And at that point, when he had finally gone to the, where it was red, black, and white, he'd gotten rid of the full pick guard. He went with a little jack plate. He switched over to the neck that was on the Bumblebee, which was a Charvel neck, and had, that's where you see it has black headstock. Well, it was originally all painted black, but then he sanded off the black in the back of the neck, and then went to eventually this. After that neck, he went to, well, not exactly this, but one of these. This is a Silvertone neck, Silvertone and Danelectro. The Danelectro has the Coke bottle shape, and Silvertone has the 6-in line. But these are great necks because these have two steel beams running through the center, so they stay really flat. The radius is like 17 inches on these, and the nut is 1 3/4 inch wide. So these were shredder necks before they were shredder necks. Carl Sandoval would grab these up when he was building guitars for George Lynch and Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen. So great necks. I'm going to be doing something interesting with this later on. It needs a fret job really badly though. So those necks, and you can see, I'll grab it again, they have a square heel. Well, you can actually, granted it's thinner this way, so you have to shim it, but you can actually bolt these right up onto a telly. Even though these are 25-inch scale versus 25.5 inch, they bolt right up and they intonate just fine. Well, Eddie had put one of these on Frankie, and that's why you see the square heel on the later Frankies, because he had put one of these on there, and he had carved his own headstock, and it had been on other guitars. It was on the Black Explorer. It was on the Charvel Star. So that neck had been on a lot of different guitars of his. So he eventually had to get that squared off neck. The neck pickup that he put in there was a red Mighty Mite neck pickup. It was something like 14K, or really hot. Not that it mattered because he couldn't wire it up. That's why you see the three-way switch stuck in the middle. He was trying to wire it up and just couldn't figure it out, so he just eventually stuck with, I'll just have it be a volume, single volume on the bridge pickup, so whatever. And this is, of course, a push-push, so that you can switch between the bridge and the neck pickup, a la George Lynch. So the other pickup, we went through the Gibson ES335 rewound pickup, supposedly wound by Seymour Duncan, but they had a falling out. And you can buy the Duncan pickup, the Duncan 78 from the custom shop. And interestingly, Seymour Duncan builds those EVH Frankenstein pickups as well. So I guess they patched up the relationship in later years. It had supposedly the Mighty Mite 1400, that white Gibson PAF that was in it at one point. He went through a lot of different pickups. before settling on that pickup that's in Frankie now, which is that really hot 14K with a low, degaussed Alnico 2 magnet, which is an interesting because he loved the Super 70 so much, which is a really powerful magnet, an Alnico 8 in a relatively low wind, about 8K, and then he eventually settled on a really hot wind, 14K, with a really low pole magnet with the Alnico 2. Interesting that he kind of reversed himself. This is a Duncan Custom, which is their custom, which is a really hot, like 16K pickup, except with an Alnico 2 magnet in it. And supposedly this is meant to be, or was, what was in the Unchained guitar. How much truth there is to that, Eddie's pretty secretive, and when he has a falling out with somebody, he stops crediting them. He talks about how, oh, I rewound the pickup in this, I rewound the pickup in that. Well, no, actually Seymour Duncan did that, you just didn't want to give him credit anymore. So supposedly that's what this is. I love the sound of them, and I love the sound of the whole Fair Warning album. I think that's his best sound, his most aggressive sound, so I love that pickup. In the back, I have 3 springs here. He would usually put 2 springs in, same with 78, and he would do all sorts of different things as he changed over to the Floyd. He would try different patterns of different springs, and eventually settling on 2 that were splayed out. I usually prefer to put 3 springs in here. I really want to keep this thing set flat without having to screw the claw all the way into the body. Now this has some cool Gretsch gold style strap buttons, but by this point he had gone through the eyelet hooks, he had gone through those weird little strap inserts, he had put the Gibson Les Paul jack plates over some rope, and finally went back to the eyelet hooks, and after drilling huge numbers of holes in his guitar. You can also see in the back of Frankie that he drilled holes for that weird little plexiglass holder that would like push the guitar up off of his body so he could do all sorts of weird tapping stuff. Frankie has a lot of holes drilled in, and it's kind of sad. Now, the Fender Custom Shop 82, year Frankie, as it existed in 82, is not where Frankie would end. Frankie would, as you saw in the Jump video, get a Kramer beak neck, and as you saw in the music video, and I'll have to put the title of the song up here because I can't remember it off the top of my head, was a music video for one of the songs off of OU812, where that was the last appearance of Frankie, and by that point it had a Kramer banana neck on it, and that was it. That was the last you really saw Frankie, and although Wolfgang used Frankie for a couple songs on his new album. And that's the evolution from 78 to about 82. There were a lot of little changes in between where Eddie would make these tweaks and changes. He had 22 fret necks on at one point, which here's a nice 22 fret neck from Coastal Customs. I'm going to put on a guitar at some point. Nice flame maple neck. Really love the look of flames. He just whatever he needed in the moment is what he did, and that's just the way that it went. So I feel like this is the greatest guitar ever made, even though it was never finished. And you can, mostly because it can be whatever you want. The Frankie is whatever you like. And I know that we've made improvements to the Frankenstrat, with 24 frets or more, 2 pickups or more. I personally prefer Kahlers over Floyds, but and this is a G.O.A.T Floyd, by the way, which, by the way, I think that G.O.A.T makes superior locking trims to Floyd Rose. Roast me if you feel like. And I know that they made better heels, better fingerboard access for later guitars, and active pickups and all this sort of stuff, and different exotic woods. I don't know. I feel like the solutions that Eddie would come up with for himself to make this what was not a shredding machine, a standard Fender Stratocaster, but it exemplifies what shredding machines were in the late 70s and early 1980s. It wasn't about having more frets. It wasn't about having, especially in the 78, which actually is the format that I prefer, because dealing with locking vibratos to me is a little annoying, but whatever. Um, but the 78 is what I prefer, where you figure out how to keep this system in tune, with a really well cut nut, lubrication, winding the strings properly around the posts, lubricating the bridge and only putting 2 screws in here and then only putting 2 springs in the back to make it easier to do big drops. Filing the fretboard down flat and putting in bigger frets and all these kinds of things. It wasn't about having 24 frets and exotic woods and crazy technology with onboard effects and active preamps and all that sort of stuff. It's a very pure guitar that you as the player have to wrench all of the playability out of. The guitar is not giving you a whole lot in terms of, if you want to go higher than 21 frets, well, you better be able to bend really, really well. Can you do everything you need to with one pickup? I obviously decided not to because I put a second pickup under the pickguard. So maybe I'm a little contradicting myself a little bit here. It was the ultimate homebrew solution. And here's this guy with duct tape wrapped around certain places, and he's going out and blowing everybody else away. There's Tony Iommi, who's actually my favorite guitarist of all time, pushing for onboard distortion, 24 fret necks, and high output pickups, and then here's Eddie Van Halen taking his beat up 21 fret Strat and playing circles around everybody. So I think that Frankie is the greatest guitar ever, and the nice thing about being able to say that is you have a lot of years to pick from. It's not one thing, and I think that's the other thing that makes it great, is that the Frankie is basically whatever you need it to be. You want a 22 fret neck? Well, there was an actual generation of Frankenstrat that you can get away with. You can do a 22 fret neck if you want to. You can do it with standard Strat trim. You can do it with Floyd. I actually made a Frankie with a Kaler at one point just because I like Kalers. So there you go. That was the Frankie over the years. That's these two Frankies, kind of highlighting the differences between the two. It's basically up to you as to which kind of Frankie you prefer. So just whatever you do, get out there and play and have fun. I'll see you next time on Obsessed with Guitars.